And it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Orrin Hatch, who is the senior senator from Utah and the chairman of the Finance Committee. Senator Hatch is in his 7th term in the Senate, and he is now the most senior Republican in the Senate, which makes him the president pro tem of the Senate, which puts him 3rd in line for the presidency of the United States. It also means he signs all legislation that is passed by the Senate, which hopefully this year will include a major tax reform bill. Now, Senator Hatch understands the importance of education and hard work. He was the first member of his family to attend college. He then went on to law school, and while he was in law school, he worked as a construction worker, a janitor, and a dormitory attendant. But he's not just a hard worker. He knows how to play, too. He's an accomplished poet, songwriter, and musician. He plays the violin, organ, and piano. And he's actually also had a brief career in the movie industry, where he had a cameo role in a film that won 4 Oscars. I don't think he won one of the Oscars, but maybe he should have. I left that out. But importantly, he's here today as a long-standing champion of and steadfast supporter of pro-growth tax reform, something he's made clear he intends to try to accomplish in his new job as chairman of the Finance Committee by reaching across the aisle and working with Democrats to produce a broad bipartisan tax reform bill that will help grow our economy, jobs, and wages. Now, I've left Senator Hatch's most important accomplishment until last, which is that he has 6 children, 23 grandchildren, and 14 great-grandchildren. So he has a very good reason, or maybe 43 reasons, to care about the future of our country. And I think the future of our country could not be in better hands than in the hands of Senator Hatch. So please join me in welcoming him and thanking him for coming.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be with all of you here today. It's 15 great-grandchildren. Might as well not let my wife be slighted here. I'm grateful to be with you. This is a very important institution as far as I'm concerned. I read everything I get my hands on, and almost everything. There's some things that I won't waste time on, but I appreciate that kind introduction. It means a lot to me. I'd like to begin with just a short story. A member of Congress is walking along the beach, and he finds an old lamp. He picks it up, rubs it, and of course a genie appears. The genie says, "I am the most powerful genie in the world who has ever lived. I can do great and wonderful things, and I can grant you your dearest wish, but only one." Well, this member of Congress is well attuned to international affairs, so he pulls out a map of the Middle East and said, "My dearest wish is that you solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict." The genie strokes his beard, looks worried, and said, "Oh dear." He says, staring at the map, he said, "That's a tough one. You should probably make another wish." The congressman is disappointed, but he understands. He says, "All right, how about this? I want you to rewrite the American tax code so that everyone can understand it." There's a long silence, and finally the genie says, "Let's have another look at that map." I think you understand this more than anybody. And I know that's just a bit of humor, but doesn't it feel true sometimes? I'm very happy to be here today to talk about a problem of inversions and what I believe may be the solution. Let me start with the basics. I don't think it will surprise anyone here to learn that I do not believe that the best solution to the inversion problem is government regulation. And the solution is not building a wall around U.S. companies to keep them from moving offshore. The best solution to this problem is, in my view, tax reform. Tax reform, if it's done right, will help grow our economy, create jobs in the United States, and discourage businesses from leaving our shores and invite businesses to set up and locate here. Though there are disagreements on the details, there is bipartisan support for tax reform in Congress. Indeed, members of both parties have expressed their support for a tax overhaul, and I believe that there is real momentum to get something done on tax reform this year. I don't want to overstate this, however. If we remain committed, I think we can get tax reform done. And believe me, I'm committed. Now, if the Keystone Pipeline is any illustration of what we're going to go through the rest of the year, we won't get it done. As the new chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I've made reforming our nation's broken tax code my highest legislative priority. I'll have more to say about the specifics of our tax reform efforts in a few minutes, but first, I want to lay some groundwork. I want to make the case for tax reform and why tax reform is the only real lasting solution to the inversion problem. When we talk about inversions, particularly in recent decades, history seems to repeat itself over and over. There's a cycle when it comes to inversions, and it usually happens in 4 steps. Step 1, a few high-profile inversions take place and people become concerned about the possibility of a trend. Number 2, the government takes steps to shut these inversions down. Step 3, inversions are temporarily halted, but the underlying economic conditions remain the same. Step 4, companies find ways around whatever solution the government puts in place, and another wave of inversions takes place. Now, we need to learn from this history. Let me give you a few examples. In 1994, a U.S. corporation called Helen of Troy, a company that sold healthcare and beauty products, inverted. Maybe Helen of Troy was the corporation that eventually launched 1,000 inversions. The U.S. Treasury reacted to the Helen of Troy transaction by issuing regulations, making it clear that a U.S. corporation inverts, when a U.S. corporation inverts, it triggers a shareholder-level capital gains tax. Given the increase in stock prices in the mid to late 1990s, attributable largely to the dot-com boom, many shareholders had a low basis in their shares, but yet these shares had a high value. So at that time, the idea of an inversion triggering a significant capital gains tax on this built-in gain was a serious deterrent against the company inverting in the first place. I wish we could say that about all companies. But then in the early 2000s, the dot-com bubble burst. At that point, shareholders didn't have nearly the built-in gains that had been so typical just a couple of years earlier. With share prices depressed, U.S. corporations realized that it was once again a good time to invert. And so in the early 2000s, there was another wave of inversions. This time, Congress acted to stem the tide, enacting bipartisan legislation to establish Section 7874 of the U.S. Tax Code, which imposed another significant hurdle for inversions. Under Section 7874, a U.S. corporation cannot engage in what is called a, quote, naked inversion, unquote, where they invert single-handedly without being considered a U.S. corporation for tax purposes. And with the enactment of this provision, inversion slowed down once again. Obviously, that decline was not permanent. If it had been, none of you would be attending this conference to talk about inversions. There were a number of factors that led to the most recent wave of inversions, which reached a peak last year. One of these factors was likely the collapse in stock prices in 2008 and 2009. With this collapse in share prices, there was a decline in the built-in gains inherent in an inversion transaction, and therefore a decline in the tax penalties associated with them. Now, this may have reinvigorated interest in inversions while stock prices were depressed. Although stock prices largely recovered over the next few years, U.S. multinationals had increasing amounts of offshore earnings, resulting in significant amounts of trapped cash. This also reinvigorated interest in inversions. So highly intelligent international tax planners, like the people in this room right now, gave yet more thoughts about ways around Section 7874. I don't know exactly how it happened, but this is how I picture it. There was a conversation sometime around 2010 where some clever tax lawyers relaxing in the south of France over bottles of Bordeaux, I think some of you understand this, conceived of a new wave of inversions. Now, as a good Mormon boy, I don't drink. That's probably why I missed out on all the filthy liquor that comes with being an international tax planner. I can see that didn't go over very well. It's tough to be a tax planner and always being criticized and picked on, I know. Anyway, in this Bordeaux-infused brainstorming session, these lawyers conceived of a way to pair U.S. corporations with smaller but yet still sizable foreign corporations in order to get around Section 7874 rules. Prodded on by these very clever lawyers, global investment banks took on the role of matchmaker, setting up U.S. corporations with foreign corporations. And the rest, as they say, is history. The last factor in this wave of inversions that I will mention today, and the one most relevant to my job, was likely the realization that U.S. international tax reform was not going to happen soon enough. Sure, there were members of Congress committed to the job, even some who were putting out their own tax reform proposals and frameworks, but there was not any presidential leadership or engagement, nor is there today. And as a result, the failures of our tax system seemed more and more permanent, and the pressure to invert became even greater and greater. It appears that all these pressures reached the tipping point with a wave of 2014 inversions. This, of course, led to the September 2014 Treasury notice. The notice has certainly stymied inversions, but if history has taught us anything, we can count on seeing more. The pace of inversions could, in fact, pick up again. And if we are unable to fix our code once and for all, it almost certainly will. For those who believe in a worldwide tax system, you probably saw the September 2014 Treasury notice as a good thing. That notice certainly made it harder to escape the worldwide tax net. For my part, I don't believe in a worldwide tax system. I believe we need to go a different direction when it comes to taxing international income and move from our worldwide-leaning international tax system toward more territoriality. If we're serious about preventing inversions and about keeping American companies from picking up and moving their legal headquarters elsewhere, we need to get to the root of the problem. Anything else that we do, any tinkering along the regulatory edges, will only address the symptoms, and in the end, it will be like using a Band-Aid to treat a broken arm. Despite what some, including the President and high-ranking officials in the administration, have claimed, companies were not leaving the U.S. because of a lack of, quote, economic patriotism, unquote. For the record, I'm no fan of inversions, but I'm even less of a fan of the rhetoric that attacks that surrounded this issue in the last year. If you ask me, it is the national leaders that use their position to demonize our own companies that are lacking in, quote, economic patriotism. Not the companies who are simply trying to do right by their shareholders and firms trying to compete, produce, and hire workers to tap into markets and customers in growing economies. But I digress. I see these inversions as symptomatic of a dysfunctional tax code that is taxing at too high a rate and is attempting to tax worldwide income. What we need is a tax system that will encourage investment and growth within the United States. For that, we need tax reform. If you've been around Washington over the past few years, chances are you've already heard me talk about tax reform. I've been making the case for tax reform on the Senate floor, in the Finance Committee, in public appearances, in written materials, and in private conversations, and I'm going to continue to do so. I want to pose a question to the audience. Raise your hand if you heard about the tax reform book that I released in December. How many of you have heard of it? Well, quite a few. Quite a few in this minority who have heard about it. Now raise your hand if you read the whole thing. My goodness gracious. And this is a tax script? You should read it. It looks like some of you have more homework to do, and you should read it. It's very interesting. Even I found it interesting. And that's a big confession by a member of Congress. In that book and elsewhere, I've laid out 7 principles that I believe should guide our tax reform efforts. I won't go into detail on each principle today. Instead, I'll just list them and encourage you all once again to read the book. Don't wait to see the movie. I don't think there'll be a movie from that, but you never know. We're so screwballed up there, and it could come out in a very comical movie. The 7 principles are: 1, economic growth; 2, fairness; 3, simplicity; 4, permanence; 5, American competitiveness; 6, promoting savings and investment; and 7, revenue neutrality. Not all of these principles directly relate to the problem of inversions, but some of them do. The one that relates the most is American competitiveness. Put simply, we need to make America a better place to do business and put our job creators on an equal footing with their foreign competitors. To do that, we need to lower our corporate tax rates and transition toward a territorial system. Our president wants to lower the corporate tax rates under certain circumstances, and I believe Jack Lew does as well, the Secretary of the Treasury. Now, that is what is being done in the rest of the industrialized world. That, more than anything else, is what makes some of these foreign countries, particularly countries like Ireland and UK, more attractive destinations for American companies seeking to invert. There's a lot of agreement on bringing down the corporate rate. Both Republicans and Democrats have endorsed that general idea as the basis for reforming our business tax system. Unfortunately, there continues to be widespread disagreement on getting rid of our current worldwide tax system. Most of my Republican colleagues want a territorial tax system. Some open-minded Democrats are sympathetic to it, especially if they really want to stem the pressure to invert. But as of yet, we have not gotten significant buy-in from a large number of Democrats on this idea. I hope that will change, and I'm going to try to get it to change. I think it will. After all, it only makes sense. Like I said, the rest of the world is already moving in that direction, and if we want to keep up or compete, we're going to have to follow suit. What we mean by a territorial tax system is not taxing foreign source business income, but making at the same time, making sure we do tax U.S. source income accurately measured. Under such a system, we would continue to tax domestic source income of U.S. multinationals, but the earnings they make offshore would not be subject to U.S. tax. Of course, I don't believe a territorial system will be a magic elixir. There will likely still be pressure to invert, even if we make that change. But this much-needed transition is the first and a very important step we can take to stem the future of inversion waves. And once we have agreement on the overall idea of a territorial system, we can talk about other ideas that will further prevent erosion of our tax base. But in all discussions, we must, and I can't stress this enough, we must always be looking at our international taxing system with an eye toward improving our competitiveness. We cannot be competitive with our current treatment of taxation of foreign source business income and our current tax rates as well. Our corporate tax rate, as you all know, is the highest in the industrialized world. And proposals for reform have envisioned rates that are not even at or below the average of OECD countries. Maybe we won't have the lowest rates in the world, but we should at least be able to not have the highest. As most of you know, the Senate Finance Committee is already fully engaged in a very real tax reform effort. We've created 5 working groups, Senator-wide and I have, that will look at all areas of our tax system with an eye toward producing recommendations for a comprehensive tax reform bill. My goal is to introduce such a bill and mark it up in committee later this year. As I said earlier this week, this is not an exercise. This isn't just for show. I'm not in this just to introduce a proposal or two and move on. My only goal when it comes to tax reform is to make new law. And with the help of all my great colleagues on the Finance Committee, Ranking Member Wyden in particular, that's just what we're going to do. I hope we can learn from our history of inversions. I hope we can go after the root causes of this problem rather than merely treating the symptoms. Once again, the solution to this problem is tax reform. I want to once again thank Brookings for having me here today. I want to thank all of you for taking time to listen. God bless you all.
So the senator is on a very tight time schedule, but he's agreed to answer one question, which I have the privilege of asking him, which is, I'd like to follow up on these working groups that you mentioned. What are you expecting them to produce? Do you have a timeline? When are you expecting them to deliver something? And is there a way that the business and broader tax policy group can help this process?
Well, thank you. That's a good question, and I anticipated that. So let me answer it this way. The plan is for these groups to study all of these issues in their various areas and come up with a list of policy proposals. We have 5 working groups. Number 1, individual income tax. 2, business income tax. 3, savings and investment. 4, international. And 5, community development and infrastructure. As you know, that we're engaged in that as we speak. Senator Wyden and I do not want to be too prescriptive on the form of their recommendations. We just need them to be useful in the development of an eventual tax reform bill. Now, our desire is to see very detailed discussion of the tensions in the policy choices and detailed proposals. And it would be best if they can produce legislative text. I don't fully expect them to do that, but if they do, if they really take it seriously, as seriously as I would like them to, they may do that. JCT, the Joint Committee on Taxation, will also play a key role in the development of the products of the groups. And as for the timeline, my hope, and I think Senator Wyden's as well, is to have all their products back to us later in this spring. As always, we'd appreciate the business community's insight and feedback on what their preferences are and what they believe should go into the various proposals. Of course, there will be some trade-offs. We won't be able to use or follow every recommendation, but I find that input from the business community is always very, very helpful, and I hope you'll all participate with us in this. Now, you'll notice that that's tilted heavily towards business tax reform. And there's a reason for that, because the president seems to want to do business tax reform solely. I would like him to go farther than that, but if that's all we can do, we certainly will get a lot of ideas from these working groups that hopefully will help us to come up with some business tax reform that will help our economy, help our country, and help us to go forward in a very progressive way, and I don't mean progressive taxation way, but in a progressive way, and I do mean that to a degree, to get this done and done well for our country. Let me just say that it's an interesting committee. We have some very, very good people on that committee. In fact, I think everyone on that committee is a superior senator. And I'm very grateful, very, very grateful to be able to chair the committee. And I've enjoyed it when Senator Baucus chaired it and when Senator Wyden chaired it. We get along, I think, pretty darn well. And I hope that that will continue now that I'm chairman. I'll surely do everything in my power to see that it continues. And we're not going to ignore great ideas of Democrats or liberal Republicans or whoever. I think it's a big undertaking. It's a big undertaking just to do, if we did full reform. I was here. It took 3 years to do that, and we were lucky to get that done. And in the intervening years, we have clobbered the code for almost every unseemly thing we can possibly put in it. And I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see us come up with a way that we could simplify this code to a degree that everybody can understand it in their economic strata. So hopefully these working groups will get some help from Brookings and from all of you. We hope you'll weigh in. We don't think that members of Congress are the only people with ideas. We get most of our ideas from outside Congress, and we certainly pay attention to all of you. It makes no difference to me whether you're liberal, conservative, or moderate. It makes no difference to me. I just like good ideas from wherever they come. And we'll do our best to do that. I just maybe on with one little story of this fellow who died, and he went up to the pearly gates, and he said, "Where do I go from here?" Peter said, "Well," he said, "you have your choice." He said, "You can either go to heaven or down below." Of course, we know which one you're going to choose. And he said, "Well, don't be so sure." He said, "How about telling me the differences between the two?" And Peter said, "Well, heaven, that's a land of smooth flowing brooklets and streams and green forests and green pasture land and good companionship and everything." He said, "Hell, all that is one old hot, vast, dry desert." The guy said, "Well, that sounds pretty good to me." And Peter thought, "Oh, gosh, no." So on the way down to the gates of hell, Peter explained the differences again. The guy relentlessly wanted to go to hell. So finally they get down to the gates of hell, and Peter said, "Look, fella, the joke has gone far enough." He said, "Heaven's a land of smooth flowing brooklets and streams and green forests and green pasture land and good companionship and everything. All this place is one old hot, vast, dry desert." The fellow said, "Well, I like the heat." Peter said, "Okay, Buster, you've had your..." He opens the gate and he looks in there, and there's smooth, babbling brooklets and streams and green forests and green pasture land and good companionship. And Peter said, "Oh, those damn Mormons, they've been irrigating again." So you hang in there. Good to see you.